morning. I want to make a very special thank you to the Francis Project, to all of the artists, to the team from the School of Arts and Culture, and in fact, as well as the tech support that have been just dashing around all morning to make sure that we are all mic'd and that everything is running smoothly. And a thank you belatedly, but a thank you as well to the folks that served our breakfast this morning and are keeping us well fed and able to focus and listen to the program. Always an important detail. In the second briefing that you heard this morning, the racial disparities were clear in every single indicator. But I want to be clear that those disparities are not inevitable. They were, in many senses, they were very deliberately and intentionally baked in to our systems as they developed. And we have the opportunity to change that trajectory. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to play a part in that role. So we're going to begin a dialogue today with some experts who are working in different sectors in the community, and we'll talk about their challenges, the way they are addressing them, and opportunities for partnership. The only rule that I gave them was that you cannot point to another sector and say they should do something. We are talking about what we can do ourselves and together. So with that, let me introduce first Councilmember Alicia Aguirre from Redwood City. She will be our public sector representative. Next is Camille Llanes-Fontanilla, the Vice President, Silicon Valley Programs for Sobrato Philanthropies. So she, of course, is joining us as our philanthropic sector representative. Veronica Goei, Executive Director of Grail Family Services, will serve as our nonprofit sector representative. Juan Salazar, Local Policy and Community Affairs for Meta, will be our private sector representative. And finally, Raúl Rodríguez, the Chancellor of San Jose Evergreen Community College District, is rounding out our panel as the higher education and workforce sector representative. So we're going to dive right in. During the previous panel, you may have noted that Somesh Dash teased a lot of the challenges that have defined our valley outside of the tech industry. So I'm going to ask each of my colleagues here, given what we're seeing, both in the data this morning and in your communities, what challenges is your sector focusing on right now primarily? I know there are many. If you could choose one to highlight, that would be a terrific start. Alicia.
So I'll go with the housing, the challenges that we're facing, because, and it's also wide in Silicon Valley. But when we think of, when we work with developers would rather build, office space. And we've heard what's happening with office space because it's so expensive. Land use, I mean, do we have areas in many of our cities, both in Silicon Valley and both in Santa Clara and San Mateo, where we could actually build the housing? So I see that as one of the challenges that we have to face. There's a lot of pieces in order to make affordable housing. I think that's one of the goals that I'd like to see that we continue to pursue.
Thank you so much. Camille.
Yeah. So after a year-long deep in-place listening session, our staff seek to put the context of the data you all looked at this morning into real life and lived experiences. And after listening in 9 cities throughout our region of Silicon Valley, really heard from communities that it's that intersection between affordable housing and economic mobility that is really critical. And so our work at Sobrato Philanthropies for our local impact work will be really focused on that intersection moving forward, and I'm really excited to jump into some examples and ideas about that.
Fantastic. Veronica.
Yes, representing the nonprofit sector, there are 2,100 nonprofit organizations in Silicon Valley working very hard to address some of the challenges. I'm going to speak today specifically about childcare, but I think it's really important to frame the childcare issue as not just a regional issue, but childcare is a global issue. There's a study by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that found that when women were asked what is the barrier for financial income in your family, the majority of all countries, low income, mid income, high income, indicated childcare, to a surprise to many. I think it's important employers lose thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars every year because of the lack of childcare that the employees have. Retention of employees are affected by childcare, turnover, and absenteeism. And research has shown that when employees have childcare, those are reduced significantly. So specifically, the work that we do focuses on the east side of San Jose. And the challenge there, no surprise, access and the workforce. So we'll dive into that later.
Thank you, Juan.
Well, for the private sector, if I could only pick one, it's very hard, but I would say it's economic opportunity. And I think at Meta, the way that we really think about it is in two ways, right? So one of them is workforce development and upskilling. And the second one is small business support. So I think with workforce development, given the data that we did see today, I think as much as we're in an economic or the downside of a business cycle potentially, especially in the tech sector, I think it's incredibly important for us to really acknowledge the fact that as much as there's been economic growth and there will be future economic growth, it's vitally important for us to think about like how do we actually make sure it reaches those individuals in our communities that historically have been left behind. So second to that, I think it's also connected to small business support, right? So I think for us as a platform as it relates to Meta, is really thinking about the shifts that have happened in our economy where a lot of businesses no longer require a brick and mortar store, but like how do we actually connect them to resources, not just at Meta, but I think with some of the other companies to really make sure that they're thriving as small businesses.
Thank you, Raúl.
For higher ed, it's really a mixture of everything that's been said. You know, our students have basic needs that need to be filled. And so that's housing insecurity, homelessness, food insecurity, mental health issues, childcare issues. It's all those things and more. And so we're scrambling, trying to change our mindset and come up with resources to meet all those needs of our students. It's really changed from what it was in the past. So trying to meet the student where they are rather than having the students come to where we are.
Thank you all very much for teeing off some of the biggest issues that we're addressing. I want to stay with Raúl for just a moment. We heard during the first index briefing about decreases in immigration, migration, and some concern was expressed around a lower number of people coming into our valley from other countries to perform work roles. What do you see in any way an upside to that, and how might we be doubling, tripling, et cetera, our focus on our local talent population and building that?
Definitely. If you look at our demographics, we're very diverse in so many different ways. And so we have folks from all over the world and many languages spoken in our schools. And so we need to build that pipeline, though. We need to make sure that our students are coming out of K through 12, coming to the community college or the university, and being prepared for these jobs. We need to double down, really, on our own educational resources and really not depend on folks coming from other countries. I mean, that's great. We built Silicon Valley on immigrants, but I think we need to focus on building our capacity here in Silicon Valley so that we're not dependent on that in the future. So yeah, I think we need more resources. We need really partnerships is really what it's all about. And so if we build strong partnerships across this valley, we can meet a lot of those needs.
I think perhaps partnerships across this room are a good place to start. It is filled with employers. You know what you need. You know the jobs that you're looking for. Working with and partnering with our education sector gives them an opportunity to help deliver and produce the kind of employees that you are looking for. To Juan and Veronica together, for a moment as we think about partnership opportunities. Juan, you talked about supporting and building small businesses. Childcare, for the most part, are small micro businesses owned most often by women of color. Is there a synergy that's possible here around really elevating the economics for childcare businesses?
Yeah, potentially, right? And I think so much of it has to do with how is it that we can connect small businesses like childcare services to the clients and sort of the end clients, just in terms of the folks that could potentially come through their doors. And again, so much of that has to do with the upskilling around sort of social media marketing and all those other elements that I think is a way that we as a platform could potentially help some of these entrepreneurs in terms of how they're operating their establishments.
Yeah, I think putting childcare in the context of the economy in the country, childcare is a $99.3 billion industry, employs 1.5 million people. So I think definitely small businesses, it's an important part of addressing the childcare needs. For the community of East San Jose, we started a couple years ago an economic mobility initiative where we are training community residents to start their own business. We've done 2 cohorts, we're at 43, we want to get to 100. We have some of the first ones starting their business by securing license. So we're increasing capacity. We're providing people with jobs. They are working in other nonprofits as childcare workers, which is what we need. So it is an important solution that we need to continue to invest in because it's showing some very promising results to a very important issue that's affecting our region.
Thank you. Camille, when you're thinking about philanthropy, how do you make decisions that you know will invest in wealth that can then grow on its own and become sustainable, as opposed to giving generous dollars, of course, to organizations or folks that need them without an understanding of how they will continue to thrive after those dollars are spent?
Yeah, I think I'm in a unique position, having been on the nonprofit side most recently and then coming to this side of philanthropy. And really, some of the data that I was grappling with was the conversation this morning around the community infrastructure and services actually being a larger sector in this region than tech. And I think one question that I have and our team has been exploring this year is how do you really invest in that infrastructure, acknowledging that that is where the largest population of people are working, but also where there's the most amount of stagnant wages and a lack of opportunity. And so while we've had a long-standing commitment to small businesses and pipeline development of the workforce, which we will continue to have, I think an important question for philanthropy right now, if we're tired of seeing the same inequities that we're seeing year over year and actually increasing disparities, is to think about who in our valley is being most impacted by these challenges and how do we focus our efforts, not because we are trying to eliminate opportunities for others, but if you center the people that can historically keep showing up on our inequity charts around racial inequities, immigration, limited education opportunities, like if we center that and we think about the problems and challenges that they're facing at that intersection, like I said, at economic mobility and housing, one of the things is then the whole region will be much healthier. And so I think as we are thinking about how do we make decisions, it's how do we prioritize the low-wage, housing-burdened, excluded populations that have historically and currently continued to show up on these charts. And really, I think the other thing philanthropy should and could be doing a lot more of is rather than truly looking them at charts on a graph, getting out there and building real relationships with our communities. I mean, I think what we saw on the stage earlier today was really important because so much of this valley is baked in with culture and joy, and truthfully, sometimes we forget about that. And I think the question that I have in philanthropy is how do we resource and support those parts of our sectors, the parts of the sectors that put food on our tables, the parts of our sectors that bring art and culture into our communities, and the parts of our sectors that care for our children and our aging population. And those were all data points that we saw today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to finish this round with Alicia, and then, believe it or not, we're going to do a quick lightning round because we're almost out of time, and I'll pregame it for all of you. What solutions would you focus on first if all obstacles were removed? What do you think would have the biggest impact? But Alicia, let's you talked about affordable housing, so let me stay with that for a moment. And we did hear Russ give a very generous shout out to all of the nonprofit organizations that have helped in reducing and preventing homelessness in our community. I'm going to say that the county and our 15 cities and the county of San Mateo and cities there have done a heroic job also in an incredibly intractable situation. So thank you for the work in Redwood City. and say a little bit about who among these representative sectors or others would be the most useful and helpful partners to you in this work.
So when it comes to housing, it would be all of the above, because housing works with transportation, works with workforce, with childcare. I mean, it's all part of it, but I can't stress enough the importance of collaboration and partnering, both with the housing nonprofits that exist in both counties, with developers that are willing to do and maybe larger housing for, you know, when we're looking, right now we did a lot of moderate, so I'm talking specifically about Redwood City. So we're looking at low and very low income, and we need those larger units. So working with developers in a way that they can profit, because as I said, some housing is very expensive, but also, working with all the other community partners that are part of it, making sure that we have funding from organizations and from some of the corporations, and that we can match it to make sure that we do have the type of housing and are able to buy. We don't have any place to build anymore in Silicon Valley in many of our cities. You can only go up, so we have to infill and do some of the work and add ADUs, and those are some of the things that are really important. And I'm working with our RENA numbers, which is a bad word in some cities, but we were able to do 150% of our RENA in Redwood City. How? By partnering and by working and convincing our community. That is the most important piece. So it's involving folks, everyone that's sitting here, but also the folks that are affected and that are living in our communities.
Thank you so much. And I didn't mean to trick you all, but I'm going to switch up the question a little bit since we are just asking one more. And instead of letting you all enjoy yourselves in the fantasy realm, I'm going to keep us grounded in reality. And I'd like to hear from each of you one thing your sector can do today to remove barriers or engage in solutions at scale that would move the needle on these challenges. And Juan, you're smiling at me, so you get to go first.
Well, I think something that's been successful for us as a company, and I would encourage other private sector entities that are here, is that I think as we've thought about this idea of community infrastructure and how do we actually integrate ourselves into our local communities, so much of that work has really been anchored around us having grassroots partnerships, not just with nonprofits, but I think in addition to that, community leaders and also local policy leaders. So I think and I share this primarily because some of the successes that we've had around housing, a big shout out to Anu Natarajan, who leads our housing work at Meta. So a lot of the funding that we've been able to deploy has been because of those partnerships that we've developed. And I think the way that they've come about has been through conversations with policymakers, and I think in addition to that, also sort of understanding like what is a way of right-sizing some of these decisions to make sure that there's localized impact that really we can see on the front level. And I think as we sort of think about it from a sector perspective, whether it's housing or economic opportunity, being able to be really close to those folks that are near you, I think is vitally important.
Thank you so much. Camille, what is the one thing your sector can do
I
right
think
now?
one thing that we're exploring, and I'm hearing it throughout the sector, is actually de-siloing our own companies and institutions. So rather than thinking about philanthropy on one side of the house, you think about an integrated organization. And so for us at Sobrato, we're really thinking about how do we advance our mission-aligned vision around sustainability and equity, but acknowledge that that doesn't only have to happen on the philanthropy side. It can be an integrated organization that utilizes all of our levers, real estate, capital, and philanthropy to advance housing security and economic mobility. And I think in this room, having a call to action to folks, if you have those levers, how do you use all the levers that you have and the influence and the brand that you have to really start to address some of these inequities that we saw?
Thank you so much. Alicia.
So one thing that we can do as a public sector, we have limitations. We're supposed to work with infrastructure and water and all of these things, but I think what we can do that's very important is to work with the aspects of our communities that we know, and each of you know your communities better, that has the greatest need. Is it homelessness? Is it food insecurity? Is it foster students that we have in our colleges? And I think that that's one of the things where cities have been stepping up and counties to really fill in those gaps. And in partnership, because we know that education can't do it alone, childcare and the public sector. So it's continue to do that, but really target the community that you live in, and what those needs are there.
Thank you so much. Raúl, I think she teed that up for you.
Okay, well, if you look at a school like Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, they have a philosophy of learn by doing. I think that's really a great way to learn. That's the best way to learn, really. And so we need more internships for our students. And so they need to get out in the workplace. They need to see the culture of work, learn the work ethic, if you will, and so on. So I kind of fudged this answer a little bit, but I'm making a pitch for internships, but we really do need them. Thank you.
Excellent. Veronica, you get the last word today.
Sure, and when it comes to childcare, I have to say that there's so much we can do, but there's an important aspect of the work, which is advocating for both policies. If we don't have some policies in place that change the way we look at childcare, because childcare should be a human right, not a privilege. If we don't collectively, because it's not just the nonprofit sector, but if we don't collectively push for legislation that does things like extend family leave, what a novel concept. Many European countries do that. It's good for children, it's good for our economy, it's good for job retention. So that's just an example, but livable wages. Our nonprofit in East San Jose starts at $25 an hour because we don't believe $17 in this valley allows people to have living conditions. And so policies that really would push the agenda is what we think as a nonprofit we should advocate for.
Please join me in thanking this brilliant panel. Thank you for your time, your commitment, your expertise, and we will follow Raúl off.